All right, good morning, everyone. I think we're going to get started. Today we're going to hear from an amazing expert about how to smash stereotypes. I'm a member of the board of directors at the Cyber Guild, a nonprofit organization focused in DC. I live down here in Florida in St. Pete. The Cyber Guild, works to make sure we all think about cybersecurity. And while you all do it on an everyday basis because it's your profession, it's really important that we help everyone across the country realize how to weave cybersecurity into their everyday living so that they too think about it, and therefore we all get more protected. Part of what the Cyber Guild does is they work to activate leaders and change mindsets. And they do that by promoting a system to attract and retain the neurodiverse talent. It's essential in our industry, and I say our industry because I also work in cyber. It's essential in our industry to attract and retain the neurodiverse because they're an incredibly valuable asset. The Diverse Minds Movement is a small but mighty organization that advocates endlessly for inclusion and unique strengths, and promoting the inclusion and unique strengths of the neurodivergent talent. We were just talking with a woman today who was saying she's finding that in her own organization, people are getting squeezed out. Teams are being viewed as underperforming because of a neurodivergent aspect. That's just not fair. So I'm delighted to pass the reins to an amazing leader at the DMM. She is Liz Green, and I'm gonna let her take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good to see all of you. So I'll give you a little background on myself because I am definitely not a cyber professional at all. In fact, if you were witness to the 5 minutes before this thing started where I couldn't turn the projector on and then I left my laptop open and they're like, it's not locked, that's a case in point of how little I know about cyber. But I am an occupational therapist. So basically, I've been an OT for 22 years. I come from a background of working with people who are neurodivergent. That's my passion area. And then I also do a lot of work in the space of helping companies become more neurodiversity inclusive, because I think a lot of the burden of change when it comes to a person getting work and keeping their job, it tends to fall on them and not so much on the company. And I think there needs to be more done for that. So and also because we have a small group, we want this to be very conversational. So at any point, please raise your hand, chime in with any questions or comments. But we're going to be talking about neurodiversity, the social model versus the medical model, go through some facts or myths, business case for it, talk through a case study, and then figure out where do you start? Me as a team member, as a family member, as a friend, as a manager, as a leader. So neurodiversity is a term that was coined by sociologist Judy Singer in the 1990s. The movement really started out of the idea of, a lot of people who may have a different condition through the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. There's more of this deficit approach in medicine. The movement started out of the idea, well, actually, people can have strengths and skills based on their condition. It's not all deficit. And so there's not a qualification that you have to identify with the movement. It's really how you see yourself as feeling misunderstood by society and realizing that you have more strengths versus, the flip side, which would be feeling constantly that you're viewed as having deficits. So, and what has been found is that the more diversity of talent you have, the greater innovation and creativity you'll see, and then the greater ROI over time. And so then if we're talking about neurodiverse versus neurodistinct or neurodivergent, so basically if you were to map out on a bell curve, all of us are neurodiverse in that we all think differently. So just as there's differences between plants and animals, so too there are differences between people. But when we start talking about people who are hitting more edges of the bell curve, tend to have spikier profiles, really incredible skills in certain areas and maybe challenges in other areas. Those terms that are often used are neurodistinct, neurodivergent, neurovariant, neurominority, and so on, of really thinking about people who tend to fall outside of what is considered neurotypical. And so this is really about societal viewpoint and then people feeling misunderstood by society. And what I tell people is, at least 20%, and I would say it's much higher within this industry, at least 20% of the workforce is neurodivergent. Now, very few people are disclosing. This is not often talked about, and there's a lot of reasons why, which we're going to talk about. Neurodiversity encompasses a whole number of conditions, but again, it's not like you can say you do or don't qualify to identify with the movement based on a condition. It's really how you see yourself. So these are some of the conditions that fall under that umbrella, and you can see the rates, for example, of autism in the US population. It's diagnosed much, a lot of these conditions, they've been around, their diagnosis has gone up over time. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I also think that testing and diagnosis has improved over time as one of the reasons. Here's another kind of, what I really like about this graphic is this it gives some information about a lot of the different conditions. Oh, sorry, I thought that was my computer. That fall under, what is happening? That fall under neurodiversity. What I like about this, though, is the focus on the strengths. So, for example, with autism spectrum disorder, but you can see in this case it's C condition because of that switch from disorder, deficit to condition, or difference is the more positive neurodiversity affirming term. Really strong concentration, fine detail processing, there's many more, memory, pattern recognition, and you can see with all of these different conditions, like ADHD, for example, a lot of creativity, ability to hyperfocus. These are things we don't hear about. If you got the diagnosis of ADHD, you never heard that you're creative. What you heard is all of these challenges with like impulse control and attention and so on. And that's a problem to me, honestly. I come even from a pediatric background and working with kids and thinking about like, just because you have a condition, you don't automatically have to think that like you're doomed. And that's a problem with the medical system, I think. And then I've talked a little bit about medical versus neurodiversity. So with a medical model, the person is disabled by the abnormalities and deficits of their own body. The social model, the viewpoint is really the environment is the one that's hindering them. The medical model says that they should be fixed, cured, or prevented, their condition should. The social model says that people should have equal rights and access to society just as they are. The medical model says that caregivers and professionals should make decisions for them due to their impairment, and the disabled person is an object of charity and a receiver of help. The social model says the person is equal, so they should have the right to autonomy, choice, and free and informed consent of their own life. With the medical model, there's the focus on person first, like the person is separate from their condition. So person with autism, person with ADHD, very much still used in the medical system. The social model really identify the person as identity first. So I am autistic just as I am tall, I am right-handed, I'm an ADHDer, I am dyspraxic, I am so on. Really, it's about owning, this is who I am. It's not something that's separate from me. And I really like this graphic in just kind of the quick description of medical versus social. This person in a wheelchair, they're saying medically, okay, their impairment's the problem. They need to do something. They need to fix them to get up the stairs versus the social model says the stairs are the problem. So something should be, build them a ramp, make this easier. So what we know is that, a lot of the top skills that are sought after in cybersecurity correlate with many neurodivergent conditions. And you and I were just talking before this about some of the skills that you've seen, especially if you could, give a quick description, given that you have a lot of cyber expertise, but also you're in the legal field, where you've seen some of these skills come up in the story you were telling me.
Sure. No, and I forgot to really introduce my full-time job is that I'm a cybersecurity attorney. And so I bring to this sort of a different perspective. I was telling her that when I was in-house counsel for a small software development company, the CEO was neurodivergent. And in order to be inclusive, he was immensely intelligent. And he sought actively to bring on more individuals that thought just like he did, because he knew that building the software product that they built, he would need that. And so he actually created and instituted a cyber test, which was testing aptitude and cyber skills, development, coding, and all of these things, and required every applicant to take and build a small software program that would help them mass sort open source data. And he gave them information that he wanted them to try to find using all of their skills, so they could apply whatever development skills they needed, in whatever language they needed to do it. And as long as they could produce and show the CEO that they could find that information, he knew that was who he was looking for. So he took a really proactive approach to hiring and including the neurodivergent, and I was lucky enough to be their general counsel.
That's great. And we're going to be talking more about what she's talking about, and I'm sure he wasn't thinking this outwardly. That's neurodiversity inclusive design, of like, what do we do that like supports the differences in thinking that people have where we can access their skills more easily. So instead of a really stressful interview, we have to talk about cybersecurity skills. Why don't you just show that you can do it and give projects and things? So these are, I'm going to run through, I'd love to know, you could shout out if you want, but fact or myth, and I'm going to go through each of these bullets. So fact or myth, is neurodiversity only about autism, and neurodivergent is synonym for autistic? Myth. Correct. Neurodivergent individuals are alike. Myth. Neurodivergent people lack empathy and are loners. Myth. I love it. It can be, right? Most cases of neurodiversity are identified between ages 3 and 7.
Almost none. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say that currently with testing, a lot of the testing is happening between those ages, but then now we're seeing more of the later diagnosis, which is good, right? But then also thinking about as an adult, if you've sort of thought one way your whole life, and then you go in for testing, you're like, wait, what? I have what? That's a huge, it's a big adjustment, right? Of now, what do I do? What's my life look like? Neurodiversity excludes autistic people with intellectual disability or who are non-speaking. It's only for high-functioning, quirky people. Myth. Neurodiversity is about celebrating differences between people, not fixing them. Yes. Mm-hmm. Neurodivergent individuals often face barriers to employment, education, and healthcare. Neurodiversity claims autism is not a disability and it's just a different way of looking at the world. I will say with that, though, within the movement, one thing to note is, so I've definitely heard it stated like, oh, autism is your superpower, or it's amazing that you have it, it's so good. That's actually kind of considered ableist because a person can view their autism as a disability. It's really their decision, right? Like their ability to make the determination of this is a disability for me versus a superpower, not somebody else telling them that it is. Neurodiversity means everyone can be completely independent and self-advocate without any supports. Correct. So these are some different programs. When we're thinking about like what's happened in the workspace related to neurodiversity, SAP in 2013 started an autism hiring initiative based on really seeing these tremendous skills, and they were wanting to tap into them. And so from there, and they basically created a playbook which you can access online, of like if you're a company and you want to hire autistic or neurodivergent folks, what would you do? And then from there, it expanded into many other companies kind of following in suit, such as HP, Microsoft, Dell. There's a lot of Wells Fargo, EY. And what they found is they've seen, like HP did a study and they saw 30% greater productivity with their autistic software engineers in comparison to typical or the norm. Israel and Australia are also recruiting autistic individuals to do cybersecurity analysis. And so all these things are well and good. I think one of the things that I focus on, though, is thinking about this isn't just about hiring 12 people if you're a 200,000 person company. This is also about thinking about the fact that you already have neurodiversity in your company and what are you doing to support it and to be inclusive regardless if somebody discloses or not. So what we see too is that when you start to design for differences, when you start thinking about the fact that neurodiversity is already in your door and you want more of it, what you see is a greater potential and benefit across every stage of the employee life cycle. So the company is perceived better. There's a broader talent pool, reduced time to hire, and reduced training spend. You see a lot of people wanting to stay, greater retention. In fact, in neurodivergent populations, there's up to 90% retention rate, which goes along with that loyalty kind of statement that you saw earlier with the skills. So you see, this is where the ROI thing is impacted and why companies like SAP have continued to do these types of hiring programs. And we know too that candidates 4 out of 5 globally say DEI is important to them, and this falls under that. And then 3 out of 5 would decline an offer from a culture that's not supportive of a diverse workforce. So it needs to be in every kind of stage of the life cycle. There needs to be inclusive practices to help people, to allow people to see like, wow, this company really is trying to think flexibly and support people who think differently.
I think you had a question in the second
Oh,
round.
yeah.
I looked at the answer.
Oh, yeah, you can.
Well, what's the question?
What's the question?
I'm not from the business side, so I wasn't sure what an ROI
Oh, return on investment. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm always doing this with the idea of like, because companies ultimately it's about money. All right, well, let's think about it in money. You want to make more money? Do this, right? So then these questions here, this is kind of moving into the space of like, how do we know, everybody knows it's well and good to like be inclusive of people who think differently. So what do we do? What do we think about? So for example, when you think about your own coworkers, what do you know about them outside of their work skills? If you don't know much, I wonder what, is that something to learn more about? What brings out the best in your coworkers? Like, how do they like feedback? When are their most desired working hours? What's the most important to them? And how do they like to be supportive are all questions to kind of ponder. And these are some people who are within the cybersecurity industry who have stated that because of their neurodiversity, they've been able to pull ahead. Kat Contillo is, she's part of WESIS, but she's very vocal in the neurodiversity space. And she said her diagnosis of autism gave her purpose, but also her pattern recognition skills have really helped propel her forward within her job. Gil Gershoni is another one, dyslexic, and he has a Dyslexic by Design podcast. He said it's, his dyslexia has helped pull him forward. Craig Froelich was talking about, and he's a CISO of Bank of America, working with a cryptographer who is neurodivergent, saying like, wow, this is probably the best cryptographer I've ever seen. So now, he spends a lot of time talking about like, we need to get more neurodiversity at Bank of America, which is great. I'm gonna talk through a case study here. So thinking about now, we know like the broader angle, of course we should be doing this, but like, let's drill down to like a person, right? So I just I made this one up, but Sarah is autistic. She's got a superior IQ and she's got clearly the training. She got a job interview at a company, but she's afraid to disclose to request accommodations for fear she will not be hired. So she gets the interview and it's very stressful. And now she's starting work. And so there's some fear already that she has. She's concerned that she'll either get fired or burn out based on the cutthroat and competitive team environment that her manager seems to encourage right up front. So she's gone through recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, and now she's working. Why is she stressed? So this is thinking like deeper about, interviewing and moving into a job is stressful no matter what, but like if we're thinking about, say, autism or neurodiversity, this iceberg kind of analogy tends to go, it's an easy way to kind of understand of that. What people may see, the top of the iceberg, is very different than what's underneath. The stress around, how do I need to present myself? What's the sensory experience? What's the hours like? All of these different things that are churning. Change is hard, like what's my manager gonna throw at me? How do I adjust to that? Executive dysfunction, that's like getting stuff done. Like, if a person tends to respond best when they're given like a list of items to do in a day, but yet the person they report to kind of just randomly throws things at them under predictability, how derailing is that? But also then they could, there could be a negative reaction towards their productivity if they're not able to do the work in the way that works for the manager. So right off the bat, knowing that there's so much under the surface that's not being touched. And so what we see is like, people aren't necessarily getting the support right off the bat. There's communication challenges and stigma, and a lot of turnover, especially in cybersecurity. And so this also ties in with thinking about psychological safety, which is like the ability to kind of challenge the status quo without fear of repercussion is huge when it comes to neurodivergent or really anyone wanting to stay at their job. And I think a lot of the time when we think about neurodiversity, there's this focus on like disclosure, like, well, nobody's saying that they have it, nobody's requesting accommodation, so I think we're okay. But that's assuming a lot, because to disclose is an extremely personal and stressful thing to do when you've been taught your whole life that there's something wrong with you because of this thing. Why would you want to share that and then be fearful of like some sort of repercussion? So I think that making the assumption that neurodiversity isn't there because you're not hearing about it is the wrong one. People are afraid. And so, looking at these stats, the importance of, and these are from Cornell, they have a DEI for HR program the certificate program. The supervisor relationship is absolutely crucial for disclosure, which is not shocking. People are more likely to disclose to their supervisor over HR anyways, but like if you don't trust your supervisor, you're not going to share anything. So that's important when you're kind of thinking about the root of it. And these are some of the reasons why people don't disclose. And there's only 4% of the population discloses when we're thinking about 30% of the population actually has a disability. Maybe they're unaware, of their needs. A lot of people still, especially we're talking about older populations, they never got a diagnosis, so what would they have to disclose anyways? Like I said, trauma is a huge one. Like if you've been told your whole life there's something wrong with you, why are you going to share at work? You would be fearful for your job, right? Communication challenges, the stigma, masking is a really big one. I see that with a lot of my clients personally. This idea of I have to hold back who I authentically am in order to fit in. We all do it, but especially with neurodivergent populations, it can take a huge toll because you're constantly trying to, like, you're reading the room and trying to fit in so much so that, like, it's exhausting and it leads to burnout. And so thinking about Sarah, the more she feels that she doesn't fit in and that she can't be authentic, the less innovative and productive she is. And then the less innovative and productive she is, the more likely she's not going to meet performance expectations. And so everybody, including her, will feel the impact. And then this leads to her not being valued. So this is a vicious cycle. Then people are like, well, why can't she get it done? She's different. Like, maybe we shouldn't have people. I remember having a manager who's like, that was a bad hire. She thought differently. We should hire more like us next time. Like, okay, right into groupthink mode, right? And this leads to groupthink. So this is the vicious cycle that happens when people feel that they can't be who they are at work. And if you want the skill of neurodiversity, because there's tremendous skill there, and you were talking about that as well, of like, you've seen neurodiversity it's so prevalent within the cybersecurity industry, and the skill so far outweighs what is neurotypical. If you want that skill, then you have to also think about the flip side of like, well, what's the environment like, right? So would love your input too on like some of the skill that you've seen and some of the other stuff we talked about. And then I would love to pass to you guys for any questions.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I work in cybersecurity. I've spent 25 years as a cyber lawyer. So that's before cyber was really known, right? And we won't date myself too much. But then most of my career has been spent in-house with IT companies. And so because of that experience, I was able to increase my cyber skills, which is what makes me relate and understand the business that you guys are all in. Most of my clients are unique IT companies that do special work for the US government. I also represent several companies that are IT resellers like Carahsoft, or that do exactly red team. I'm mentioning, because she was speaking about it earlier, that do red team analysis or data breach remediation. And so all of those skills in cybersecurity, I've seen the absolute benefit of having a neurodiverse team. The way a neurodiverse team thinks about a cybersecurity threat and where to close off the entry points. I'm not an IT professional, so take that with what it is. Close off the entry points. They really have to be able to go through volumes and volumes of information at a rapid speed. And there's not everybody that can do that. There are actually lawyers, that they don't often talk about it, right? But there are neurodivergent tendencies in law firms, and you find that in lawyers too, for similar reasons. I have the ability to go through volumes of information, but please don't put me in a courtroom. And so you find these things in lots of fields. Cybersecurity is one that often gets talked about, maybe even to the point of having a stigma. But I don't, that's why we're here to smash stereotypes, right? So I think that, the cyber industry is such a prevalent place, and therefore, what an amazing experience and opportunity.
Great. And actually, I would love, not that I want to,
Point.
You brought up something really interesting. You're a red team manager, and also there's a lot of neurodiversity on your team. But you're here, which also makes me think like clearly you're trying to make a positive impact with your team and create an inclusive environment, right? But I would love to hear your input on like how you've navigated as a manager of with a neurodivergent team, especially when you're talking about like communication breakdowns. Like, what do you do? Where do you feel like, what do you think every manager should be doing? And then what do you feel like is kind of missing that you wish there was more of?
Yeah.
Maybe for your own support or for the team support.
So I'm probably the most neurotypical person on my team.
As you build the program.
Well, I mean, one thing is that there's already neurodiversity there, right? And my first question would be, do you have outward vocal representation of neurodiversity within your company already? Of people who are identify with the movement and say, okay, we want more of us? If you don't, then it makes me wonder a little bit about psychological safety of like, do people feel safe talking about this? And if you're not hearing people talk about it, then maybe starting with like an awareness kind of workshop, just opening thoughts?
Oh, no, I was going to say, so I have visual disability, and when I was going to school, I was kind of afraid to tell the teachers I have this type of disability because I didn't want to get any backlash.
Yeah.
Right? So, but I grew out of that, after I finished school, and then so I'm on the University of Maryland's Alumni Advisory Board. So I'm trying to tell them, trying to convey the message to make a softer environment for for folks who have these type of disabilities to make it more ease and more welcome, right?
Yeah.
And they disclose this kind of things. I'm also so I work for National Cyber Center. We have a student association. I run their student association. We got like 7,200 students, and I run into a lot of students who have these different type of challenges, of telling people, their disabilities, and they feel that they're not going to be able to get hired, or they're going to be left out. So I always tell them, just be yourself, and as you mentioned on your slide, highlight your skills that you have and try to convey it to them. But it's hard for them to break out the shell and to go that route and just like she mentioned, just if you don't feel comfortable where you're at, you should be working there. But economy's kind of hard too, and finding jobs is kind of hard too. So a lot of these students just feel like if they divulge this, they're not going to be able to get the job.
Yeah.
Or they don't have the right amount of skill sets, or the social aspect of it too.
Yeah.
I think that ties, it seems to me, like just listening, that it ties right in to the exact question and guidance you were giving in the back, is that promoting awareness amongst whatever organization and whatever environment you're in is how to be the best champion, is how to get the program started.
Yeah, and I would say it's really important you have senior leader buy-in and messaging. If you don't have support from the top for any type of initiative like this, it's not going to work. And I'll give you an example. I was talking with a company who, and they had senior leader buy-in, but the other thing too is it's not just thinking about hiring. It's thinking about, what do we do once they're in? Are the managers set up for success? And this is one of the problems that like SAP and Microsoft, and they wouldn't want me to say this, have had, is like you've got to think about retention of the people you hire as well as everyone else. So this one company that I talked to, they did a hiring program with their vocational rehab, which every state has. If you want to hire people with disabilities, you can contact them, it's free. And so they did a hiring program, apprentice program with them, and they placed some people, but the managers weren't given enough support, and the whole thing backfired. None of the people lasted, and now the managers are more likely to not want to hire people with differences. And that's the thing too, is it's not just about training the immediate managers, but it's thinking about the team, the department, and so on, because those managers might leave. So I've had other clients personally that I've worked with where they've gotten hired by big firms. Their manager was given some training. The manager got shifted to another team, new manager who didn't get any training, person got fired, right? So then this is where I feel like sometimes it probably feels overwhelming as a company of like, well, what do we do? And so, I'm happy to chat with you separately too, because if you Google the Autism at Work playbook, you'll at least get some ideas on like, you have to have, this has to be part of your company strategy. You have to have senior leader buy-in. There's a few key things from the top you need, but then happy to talk separately about kind of that journey of like, you want this thing to last, because that's the problem is a lot of these programs, they have a lot of hiccups because they're only focused on recruiting and hiring. So that's a really good question. So I think this is where it's really important to think about every stage of the employee life cycle of like, for example, where are you recruiting? So what do your job descriptions look like? How clear are they? What does your website look like? How easy is it to navigate? When you recruit, are you only recruiting from certain schools? What's the messaging look like? Like, there's a company called Ultranauts. They do software bug detection. They're basically built from the ground up wanting to hire neurodivergent folks. And I think it's like 80% or more of their workforce is neurodivergent. And they put on their job description, neurodivergent individuals encouraged to apply. And it's all over their website. DEI everywhere. I mean, I have Gen Z also clients where Gen Z is a force, right? They're not gonna stay at a job unless it's like so I've had Gen Z clients where they're like, I looked at the DEI strategy of the company, these are 19-year-olds, and I don't like it, so I'm not gonna apply. And I'm like, I didn't think about that when I was 19, like, way to go. So that's the thing too. And then when you're thinking about, like you mentioned, this hiring idea of showcasing skills, give a project, way more inclusive than like, I'm interviewing you and asking you questions and it's extremely stressful.
Yep.
Flexibility is huge when we're thinking about jobs. So like, what are your best working hours? What can I do to support you? I love that your communication, like you nailed it with, it's just about asking the questions, because the more safe people feel, eventually they may disclose and ask for more, or maybe they won't. They're just happy they're gonna stay there. And I'm happy to chat with you separately too, if you'd like. And I was going to mention do you have an ERG, Neurodiversity Employee Resource Group that you're a part of? When you were, I'm asking you. Yes, sir.
Yes,
so that's.
What I do. They were having a presentation on neurodiversity for the company right now.
That's great.
Fantastic.
Because I was going to say for the guy in the back who's like, what are we company? I mean, an ERG, having employees help drive the change is really crucial. Having that visual representation, and then you have to have a senior leader sponsor for the ERG, which is also helpful.
Mm-hmm. Having somebody at senior leadership also disclose their own
neurodiversity
is a huge bonus in this whole discussion, because when you have somebody saying, I am neurodiverse,
yes,
it enables other people to, if not publicly announce it, at least go, okay, I feel seen, I feel accepted. When we have some of the company meetings for the neurodiversity group, a lot of people going, wow, I didn't realize other people were feeling that exact same thing today because of X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that
That's
makes
great.
people feel a lot better.
Yeah, that's
well,
great.
I mean, it was kind of that's how society was. That's the rules that we grew up on, and now it's like, hey, we're more aware of this existence, and now we're, by being able to confidently hold that or say that and represent that, hey, I'm neurodiverse, then it helps people realize that we're trying to break the old social standard.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear from you, but it seems to me that that exact reason is the reason companies like the old blue chip stock companies like the IBMs of the world have such a difficult time making a shift, because the generations that started the culture were far before the concept and the thought. So I love the fact that you're a startup and you're starting new. You get to be inclusive as it goes.
Easier. Yeah.
Because changing the tide of somebody who's been around since the 20s or 30s as a company makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
Have
it's
you seen
funny
that before?
you mentioned IBM though, because they have a huge neurodiversity initiative there, which is cool. But I mean, it is the thing with a lot of these initiatives is it's really important to look under the glossy surface. Like so for example, I have a colleague who works at IBM and is neurodivergent, right? And there are challenges, right? So then it's like, how do you navigate that with a much bigger company? It's really hard. because then it's down to how do you build psychological safety in teams, and how do you get managers to actually want to buy into that when managers are super stressed themselves. Like, it's about getting your stuff done, right?
Yep. Had another question in the second
Go for
row.
it. Actually,
Go ahead,
I'm gonna-
you.
Okay. I hope it's okay, because I'm.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna.
Perfectly
I think
fine.
this dialogue is better than me presenting anyways. So.
I agree. And look, it's locked.
See, I did.
Well, one of the keynote speakers yesterday, Jason Street, has been in the security community for decades and is neurodivergent, talks about that fairly regularly around the globe as part of his presentations. There's the other side of this, the stress that it causes us just living to it. Before I knew I was neurodivergent, I had given a couple talks on stress in the security community, and this is a huge part of it, of thinking differently causes stress when you don't know how to communicate. And a lot of us face burnout at least 2 or 3 times in our career, and it hurts.
Yep.
So sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to circle back to it's perfectly fine that you don't have the business background, but she had a question that wasn't business related. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry, yes.
No, it's okay.
No,
No, it's all right. I started a cybersecurity program at my technical college about 5 years ago. They kind of pulled me in out of the IT field and said, hey, we really need you to do this. So, but I've learned over these past 5 years that, I don't know what it is about my program, but the neurodiversity in my program is incredible. And that's why, but I've learned to talk to my business partners to help get my students placed. With their permission, I'll talk to them about, different interview options and stuff like that. But what can I do to prepare my students once they're out there to advocate for themselves and to, like, when they do want to switch careers and stuff?
Yeah.
That's a great question. And I mean, that's the thing, even you kind of touched on it when you're thinking about yourself. So with my own personal clients as an occupational therapist, really I'm about helping people kind of function within their environment. So I work with clients, but then I do this business side of stuff. And the first thing I think is self-awareness. Like what actually helps me tick? What burns me out? When do I need breaks? What's my sensory reactivity like? What makes me have a meltdown? Yep. And then how do I advocate for it? And so, for example, you can Google it. It's called Manual of Me. That's one tool. Manual of Me. And it's basically you fill out this, a bunch of questions. And out of that, you'll get this little report that's like, oh, it seems like, you do best with feedback this way, it goes through, it gives this person their own profile, like a user manual. And actually, it's something that I encourage companies to use as an onboarding tool of like, hey, how about you figure out how your employees like feedback? And you could do this across the board, right, with every employee on the team. And then you could say, like Ultranauts, that company that I mentioned, every team member is responsible at looking at each other's user manual to then kind of ensure, there's some streamlined kind of beneficial conversation, communication that goes on for people. So yeah, the awareness of what do I need and then advocating. And the other thing too is I never tell anybody to disclose because that's so personal. But what I do try to coach them on is like, how can you request what you need while framing yourself up? So for example, saying, a lot of people will say, well, I have trouble with X, Y, or Z. Should I say that to the manager? Well, how about you flip it and you say, well, I really do well with when you give me a list of things because it makes me more, then it's just, it's advocating, but it's not there's no link to something negative. And so that's helpful too, of just kind of thinking about what's your plan, your script, that kind of thing.
It's funny you say that, tasking about lists, just to tell a story in another avenue. My primary associate is neurodivergent, and she said it was perfectly fine if I say that in front of everybody today. But I went through that same learning progress. She didn't realize that she did better with lists. And so when I would give her tasks, sometimes she just dropped the ball. And I would be like, what am I missing? So we just kept having conversations about how do you work best? What way works for you? Would you like a spreadsheet? Would you like a bulleted list? And so we just went through until we found a list and a method for her that worked. And it's interesting as you all talk about it that I can see other associates that I should probably reach out to and try to encourage them to frame it differently instead of, revealing to a partner that they have a challenge, saying, I'm really successful if you give me 10 things to do and I just chop down the list. Because I will get them all done for you and quickly and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So we're on time. Happy to chat a little more if anybody wants to, but this was a great audience, and I hope that you all got something good out of it. Really appreciate your time.
Loved the interaction.
Thank you.
Thanks.